Imagine a world where biosensors monitor patients at risk, drugs and pills are bioprinted, tailor-made organs are grown from patients' body cells, hereditary diseases can be treated more effectively. Human genome sequencing will teach us more about our health. Gene editing will be a viable treatment. All this is right on our doorstep. These developments show us that we have the intellectual capabilities to surpass many health and environment-related hurdles. We just need to support our innovators to turn fiction into reality. The rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines and their innovative spillover into new mRNA methods is one example of how tangible these dreams are becoming. How can the EU help this sector flourish in Europe? How can we make sure that the next breakthrough will take place in one or several of the EU's member states? Join us on November 18 to find out.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to this event under the Science Not Fiction series. My name is Ana Gumbau and I will be your host this afternoon. We're kicking off this third event of the Science Not Fiction series on the medicine and biotechnology. The objective of these events is very clear. As we have just seen in the video, we are trying to discover how can we get the science fiction of today become the reality of tomorrow, which are the adequate policy frameworks to ensure the scale-up of the latest technologies in a wide range of policy areas. So this event builds up on the previous two science not fiction events. The first one was on digitalization and the second one on industry. This event is proudly organized by the European Liberal Forum, and we would like to thank our sponsors that have made this event possible today, who are Qualcomm and Apple. We have a bunch of you joining us today at the Renaissance Hotel here in Brussels, so to each and every one of you, welcome and thank you very much for being with us. We also have many of you joining us through Zoom, and you can also follow us through YouTube and on a live streaming through the Brussels Times. To all of you, remember that you can interact with us and connect with us throughout the event using the hashtag ELFEvent. Now, let's get into the topic. So the COVID pandemic has taught us all the importance of investing in our health and in the medical sector, why we need such an important, resilient health sector. So now is the time to support the innovators that will turn our fiction into a reality. So how can the EU help this sector flourish in Europe? What's the adequate policy frameworks, the partnerships that we need to make it possible? So in the next couple of hours, we will be hearing from innovators, from policymakers, and we will also have time for questions. So if you're listening to us, wherever you are joining us from, remember that here in the room, you will be able to ask questions. We're going to have a microphone running around the area, and you can also ask us questions through a Q&A function. So without further ado, to start, we have a first debate to get us running from Šárka Shoup for some introduction remarks. She's the Executive Director for the Institute for Politics and Society and also a board member of the European Liberal Forum. So Šárka, good afternoon. Are you with us? Sure, if we have Šárka with us. She's going to be joining us in a couple seconds. We're going to be seeing her. But make sure that we have a great lineup of speakers with us in the next couple of hours. So we're going to be able to see different innovations and different perspectives across the health sector, from gene editing to Canopy. What's the policy framework behind it? Like, what are the different innovations that are in the pipeline, and how can the European policy framework support it? I'm not sure if we have Šárka with us already. I don't think so. So we're going to make just a couple minutes, because she should be joining us possible. So in a couple minutes she should be joining with us. So before then we get started, we can just go through the program a little bit, because after Šárka will be joining us, we will have a first discussion. And kind of a first scene setting with us, with Dr. Jean-Christophe Pagès, professor and president of the French High Council for Biotechnology, who will be talking to us about the horizon for medicine and biotechnology, and like what are the latest developments ahead across sectors, and for instance, with a focus on gene editing, where we will be talking about several of also the key issues at stake here when it comes also to privacy and innovation, and how can we make sure that that all the developments are aligned with our values. So I just see that we have Šárka with us already. Hi, Šárka, are you with us? I don't think we can hear her. Hi, Šárka, are you with us? All right, I don't think we can hear you yet over here, so let me just get back to you and continue in the meantime talking a little bit about the program and what's going to be coming up. Because after Professor Pagès' introduction, we're going to have the first of our lightning talks. So we're going to have two of the lightning talks running today. There's a 10-minute talks with speakers across the health and medicine sector who are driving innovation to get us up to speed with the latest developments. We're going to have a first one with Dr. Martin Schulz. He's a global senior medical director for the gene therapy platform at Pfizer. We're going to be talking about the different innovative products that are working with and the main problems that they're running into from the kind of perspective of regulation. Then afterwards, we are going to have first of our two panel discussions. The first one will be on what are Europe's innovation policies and how we can make them more innovation friendly to spur the scale up of different startups and small and medium enterprises working on the topics of innovation in health and medicine. We're going to have Annika Szabo from EIT Health Scandinavia and Alexander Natz from the European Confederation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs. And then we're going to have the second of our Innovators lightning talk. We're going to have with us Isabell Crasto de Stefano. She's from Canopy Growth, the Director for Government and Stakeholder Relations on Spectrum Therapeutics, where she's going to be talking to us about the different innovations that are in the pipeline in terms of Canopy. And then we're going to have the second, but not the least, of our panel discussions under the title, Are We Ready for the Next Health Revolution? This time we're going to be joined by Maya Matthews from DG Santé at the European Commission, the Directorate General for Health and Food Safety, and also by Remko van Leeuwen. He's the founder and CEO of Madame Therapeutics and a board member of the BEAM Alliance, where we're going to be asking ourselves two key questions, which is, are we ready for the next health revolution? What is going to be this new health revolution all about? And given on the situation and the context that we're at, we're going to be wondering ourselves, are we ready to respond to the next pandemic? And understanding a little bit, like, okay, once again, like, what are the innovations on the pipeline and how can we ensure that the EU has a prompt response on the next, let's say, health emergencies? I see that we have Šárka again with us. Can we try it now? Hello, Šárka, are you with us? Hi, great to have you here.
And sorry, there must be some technical issues there, so I'm happy that you can hear me finally.
No problem at all. Thanks for being with us, Šárka. How are you doing?
Thank you for inviting me. So again, I'm sorry, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the European Forum's event today, Science Not Fiction. And this event will go into depth on the importance of the medicine and biotechnology sectors within societies, what their impacts are, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has shaped things, and what next steps should be taken. Across Europe, the landscape of what medicine and biotechnology look like is changing. And today's event aims to help those that are here understand the current situation with greater depth. The biotechnology sector that on paper has been a high priority, but in practice it has been kept on the back burner. This is an issue. While the biotechnology sector always slowly yet surely makes progress in society, however, the pandemic has seen a huge phenomenon of what advances could be made when there is more attention to these sectors. The COVID vaccine was rolled out with almost minimal risks at record speeds, like the world had never seen before. This even in our modern history was seen all across Europe. And today we are all here to ask, would it be like if Europeans focused more of their economies towards medicine and biotechnology? This question is very valid and that needs to be discussed by the guest speakers and experts that have gathered here to discuss what this possibility looks like and if it's actually needed or not. The possibilities that this increased focus could cause are infinitely unknown. But alas, there is always opportunity cost with whatever decision that is made. And biotechnology and medicine are a very integral part of society that may be more and more important in the future. The COVID pandemic has been a stark reminder that the future of what may come is truly unknown. The investment we put in now just may save our lives tomorrow. This event will show what this investment could look like and what may happen if it doesn't happen. So I encourage you all to get comfortable in your seats and prepare to have new ideas presented to you from the speakers we have here today. I wish you all here a wonderful time learning about this very up and coming topic in the European scope of politics, and that there will be sparks of new ideas on how to approach this issue all through the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Šárka, for being with us, and also for this first words of wisdom and advice. We're going to be keeping an open mind for the new ideas on the health, medicine, biotechnology sector that we will be looking into in the next couple of hours. So thanks a lot once again. And now it's time to kick off our first talk slash interview of the day. This is going to be a scene setter to understand okay, what are really the topics that we're talking about and what's really at stake. So the session is called Looking Beyond the Horizon in Medicine and Biotechnology, and I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Jean-Christophe Pagès. He's the president of the scientific committee at the French High Council for Biotechnology, and he's also a professor of cell biology at the CHU and the Université Toulouse 3. Professor Pagès, are you with us?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Great to have you. Great to have you here, Professor. So I'm going to be jumping straight to I think the first question that brings us together here today, which is if you could talk to us through a little bit what's coming up on the horizon in the fields of medicine and biotechnology, especially if we're looking into the fields of health, food, agriculture, energy and environment, and how these all sectors kind of interact with medicine and health.
Thank you. It's a wide question. Regarding medicine, as you know, we have several products that are arriving for gene therapy. They are quite efficient in hemophilia, in adrenoleukodystrophy, in the cancer with the CAR T cells. So there is a broad spectrum of gene therapy products that are now on the market. They were almost all made using viruses as vectors for the transfer of the gene which bring the effects. And now we are also the witnesses of a new system, which is derived from the homologous recombination system and the CRISPR-Cas9, which will, I guess, and we hope in a way, modify quite widely the field of gene therapy. And we have already several clinical trials for genetic diseases, tackling the disease by itself, so the gene which is involved in the disease, or other genes. And the first results that we get from these trials are quite encouraging, and we foresee that that could be a revolution in the next few years, raising also critical question, because due to this revolution, perhaps the paradigm of somatic gene therapy, which is the only one allowed worldwide these days, could be a little bit shaped by this efficacy and the specificity of the therapeutic effects. So this is a huge question that we have, and also the question that will come very shortly is with the increasing number of diseases that we will be able to cure, to who will they be accessible and at what cost. And I think that it is one very important question for the European community and worldwide, in fact, to anticipate these questions in Europe. And for the environment and the question of also the genome editing is a very important perspective in terms of generating new plants, addressing very important questions such as resistance to diseases or modification of the composition of the plants. But there are other questions related to the regulation of these plants, and the European Community has also to deal with that. And we are expecting some modification in the rule to implement these techniques.
Professor Pages, you mentioned the ethical consequences and discussions ahead. So I think that's something that many of our speakers will be wondering about. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yes. So as I told you, the current and we are all prone to promote that approach, which is devoted to the cure of the disease in one specific patient. But we do not address the question of the irreparable modification of the germline. And this question was unfortunately raised, sadly, because of the first, I don't know whether it was a trial or really an ethical trial in China 2 years ago, in which a disease which is not really needing that type of approach was performed by one of our colleagues, and it generated 2 twins having a mutation in the CCR5 co-receptor for HIV, and this means that it is possible to modify the germline and the eggs. In fact, it was an eggs using that techniques. So in a way, it's proof of concept, but the question remains, and we have to be very careful with that, because it could have a lot of consequences, and now the technique is not fully mature to be used in these fields, but we have to anticipate that. And about, and this is a question which needs a lot of effort for people to understand what's going on, and of the regulator to propose a good regulation of these techniques.
Mm-hmm. Professor, you mentioned the word anticipation, and of course the next health revolution and the latest technological advancements and the preparedness for potential new diseases requires this anticipation, this strategic foresight. So a next question for me is, how can we move from only looking at what's right in front of us to really looking 2 steps ahead and being able to anticipate what these next challenges are going to be about?
I think that the next challenge will be the delivery of the tools for gene editing in that field, because we now have good molecular tools that could be used in vitro. We are able to modify very specifically one gene, but we need to deliver the tools and in vivo for some diseases where you cannot have stem cells that could be grafted following the modification. So we need to have these vectors or these techniques to deliver the enzyme and the because very specifically the disease. So the main hurdle now is what kind of vector that we have to have a widespread modification in vivo.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at Europe specifically, if we could paint a picture on how the innovation ecosystem in health, in medicine, biotechnology looks like, how would it be looking like? So is Europe more of a continent of, let's say, passive users rather than active innovators? How would you assess that?
I think we have in Europe a lot of universities startups that are already in the field, and these small companies, those from Emmanuel Charpentier and many others, are now quite efficient in developing new tools. So we are not passive in that way. I think that the main question is how are we prepared, and how are our people in Europe are prepared to understand the question and to accept or to be able to support the use of these techniques for somatic gene therapy.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, in this sense, if we get back to, let's say, the perceptions about ethics and all the issues that bring us here, is like, how can we make people feel positive about innovation in the fields of medicine, of biotechnology, and not necessarily considering it a potential threat?
This is quite a very difficult question. I think for the medical perspectives, the vaccine question that we have, and we are very sad to see that a lot of people are still reluctant to vaccination using these new techniques, and it should motivate deeper understanding and what the reason for that. But the thing is that for genetic disease, we have a lot of NGO which are involved in promoting the cure for the genetic disease they are dealing with. And these are patients, they suffer, and they are able to show how come how these new techniques could help for disease and for the situation. And I think empathy is part of the solution. So we have to be very careful. I'm an MD, and we are not in France, at least. We are not used to push the patient to ask for a cure. But sometimes it's important to remind to the others that these people are suffering and some are dying. And so we have to do something. And perhaps a combination of active promotion by the governments and the NGOs could be a solution to show how it is important to get access to these technologies.
Mm-hmm. If I can perhaps ask you one wrap-up question for this first session, also in relation to what you have just mentioned, Professor. What do you think? So, more than a year and a half on after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, what do you think that are the key lessons that the sector has learned in terms of innovation? I mean, of course, we've had to innovate like really fast, and we had to accelerate all the processes ahead. But what's your impression from this point of view, 1 year and a half on?
I would say where there is the will, there is the way. Because we if you have asked me 2 years ago whether it would be possible to produce such an amount of vectors such as adenoviruses in a short period of time, I would have said it's almost impossible. And finally it was. So I'm quite optimistic about the ability to, where there is a need, to have this mobilization of the industry to provide with gene therapy vectors. And so now it's a matter of how that will cost. And for rare disease, I think the question is not solved, and we have to find a way to address this question and to find the money to cure these diseases. And I would say that there is no technological barrier to cross. There is most of the time a proactive policy to promote this therapy and to make them accessible to the people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Professor Pagès, for setting the scene so nicely, for painting this big picture on how innovation in health and medicine and biotechnology looks like at the moment in Europe, and also for introducing some of the topics that will also keep us busy in the next sessions. For instance, you just mentioned gene editing, which is something that we'll be continue discussing. So thank you very much once again. And now it's time to move to the first one of our Innovators lightning talks. As I mentioned earlier, these are going to be talks of about just 10 minutes with some of the key innovators in Europe, talking us through a little bit. What is it that they're working about? What's in the pipeline? And what are the main challenges? So I'm delighted now to welcome online Dr. Martin Schulz. He's a global senior medical director for gene therapy platform at Pfizer. Good afternoon, Martin. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. And as you can see, I even switched on the light in the background for this light talk.
Excellent. Great to have you here. So I'm just going to cut through the chase. What innovative products, what are the key ideas that are keeping you busy at the moment that you're currently working on?
So it's really gene therapy. Gene therapy, as you know, is the next generation of medicines that target the underlying cause of a disease at a cellular level. And here at Pfizer, our initial focus is on genetic disorders with a single gene alteration. So it's been mentioned by Jean-Christophe Pagès earlier, hemophilia A, hemophilia B, and also DMD. These are disorders that really keep us busy. And what we do here is the functioning gene is delivered to the target tissue using a carrier. So we use a recombinant AAV carrier to deliver the functioning gene to the target cells, where then the protein that has been missing before or has been non-functioning is then being produced by the cells and then, is alleviating the disorder for the patient, hopefully. So gene therapy really has the potential to offer long-term transformative clinical benefits to the patients, and that's important potentially with one single treatment. And our hope for the future is that, of course, because there are many rare disorders at the moment that do not have treatment options, that we might be able to generate these treatment options for these patients in need. However, I just want to caveat here that gene therapy, while it's very exciting and holds great promise, it's not an appropriate treatment option for all patients with a certain genetic disorder.
And thank you very much for this first introduction. So could you talk to us through a little bit more about what are perhaps the main barriers that you're finding yourself into in terms of delivering these next innovations in gene therapy?
Yeah, I think very broadly what we see is that there are scientific advances in medicine and science in the field of gene therapy that are really substantial and very promising, but there are regulatory, reimbursement and policy challenges that need to follow. So at the moment, there's a little bit the feeling that the science is outpacing the policy making that needs to happen. And of course, we need these policies in place to be able to bring these therapies to the patients who are in need.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, if you had like policymakers with you, what do you think are going to be these advancements and which the regulatory framework that is needed?
Well, there are a few examples. So let me start with the clinical development of gene therapies in Europe, because Europe, in all honesty, is a little bit behind when it comes to clinical development, worldwide. So gene therapies, and one of the reasons is that gene therapies are considered GMOs, genetically modified organisms. So every gene therapy clinical trial needs to comply with GMO regulations. And these GMO regulations, they are implemented slightly differently in each EU member state. So complying with these GMO regulations is really complex. So they vary significantly between the EU member states. And that actually makes the EU a less attractive region for these clinical trials. So just a proof point, between 2014 and 2018, globally, there has been an increase in new clinical trials involving ATMPs, so advanced therapy medicinal products that includes gene therapy by 32%. But in Europe, it actually stayed flat. So there was an increase of less than 2% in Europe. And that's obviously detrimental for a number of reasons. But one of them is that patients with rare or ultra-rare genetic disorders, they are waiting for that because they do not have treatment options.
So from what I understand, the policy framework is quite fragmented still across member states. So what do you think that can be done about it?
Well, you talked about the COVID-19 pandemic earlier and what the European Commission did there. And I think one of the things they did that was very effective in bringing vaccines to the people was to temporarily exclude potential COVID-19 treatments and vaccines from some of the provisions of these GMO legislation. And they did that, recognizing the complexities and knowing that this would slow down the clinical development in this public health emergency. So I think this might be a good time for the European Commission to reconsider the scope of the GMO legislation as it pertains to gene therapies as well. Of course, that's another kind of health emergencies that gene therapies try to target. We've got patients with rare disorders that are, individually rare, but collectively quite common because there are 7,000 rare disorders, it is estimated. So, so there's a need there. And I think by doing that, by reconsidering that, that would certainly make European countries more attractive for these gene therapy clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. And which other potential challenges do you see in trying to bring gene therapy to patients in the future?
Well, I think our healthcare systems, and I mentioned that in the beginning, they're not quite ready for one-time treatments with a potentially transformative and long-term effect. So they are our so-called value frameworks. So these are the ways in which the value of therapies is assessed by governments and payers. These need to evolve for gene therapies. And similarly, the payment models that we are using, they also need to evolve. So there's a feeling they should include value-based or risk-sharing agreements that really connect the reimbursement to how well these gene therapy medicines work in the patient. But in order to do that, we really need to build the infrastructure for that. We really need to build the registry infrastructure to collect the data in a harmonized way, the patient data, the appropriate real-world data, to really follow up these patients and really see how well they are doing. And, that cannot be done from one day to the next. That's quite a process. But it is really important to collect this data, this patient data on safety, effectiveness, durability of patients, of the treatment in patients after gene therapy, to mitigate the uncertainty that is, of course, there of the products. Because when you think about a product that might work for 10 years, hopefully, or even longer, the clinical trial will only be a couple of years. So there needs to be a mechanism to collect real-world data and then assess the real-world performance, and really assess how well the patient is doing, to then and connect that with the reimbursement.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Because also in relation to that, if I can also ask you, for instance, about cross-border access for patients, do you see this as a challenge, or anything else that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I think this is another really important topic. We in Europe, in principle, we have cross-border healthcare, so European citizens can seek the healthcare in other countries. But in particular, when it comes to gene therapy in general, but also particularly when it comes to gene therapy, there are a few challenges. So one of the challenges that patients need, first of all, they need to know that this exists, right? And their healthcare provider needs to know that as well. And then they need to know how to navigate these cross-border healthcare pathways, which is not always easy. And then, of course, there might be reimbursement challenges. So you've got different countries with different reimbursement systems, and that needs to be figured out. And then I talked about that earlier, data collection is really important for gene therapy. So data collection and long-term follow-up of patients. So, I think patients should be followed up for, ideally a lifetime, at least 15 years. Is what the 15 years is what the regulators say, but I think a lot of people agree it should be as long as possible. So we need to, this needs to be figured out when we think about cross-border access. And I know that the European Commission is currently evaluating cross-border healthcare. There's a public consultation, and that's great. And I think there's been a great deal of input from a lot of stakeholders, which shows how important that topic is. So hopefully some of these challenges that we see today will be resolved going forward. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Martin. We will need to conclude our talk here, but thanks a lot for joining us, for providing us with these examples, right, of how really innovators on the ground are advancing new technologies, and in this case, understanding better the concept and the ideas behind gene therapy. So thank you very much, Dr. Martin Schulz, for having joined us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so after this first Innovators Lightning Talk, we are moving to our first panel of the afternoon under the topic, how can Europe make innovation-friendly policies? I would just like to briefly remind everyone in the audience here on site and online that you will be able to ask your questions to the audience. We'll have a little bit of time for audience questions, for input. So if you're in the room, make sure to raise your hand. We're going to have a microphone running around the room. And if you're online, of course, you can use the Q&A function to send us the questions. They're going to be coming to me on the phone. So if you see me on the phone, it's not because I'm checking Twitter or anything like that. It's just because I'm keeping track of the questions that you will be sending us. So make sure to give us your input, what's really ticking you, and we're going to try to address as many of these questions as possible. And now I see that I have with me here in this virtual stage, Annika Szabo-Portela. She is a PhD and collaboration lead and deputy director at EIT Health Scandinavia. So good afternoon, Annika, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mm-hmm. You have just listened to our first lightning talk on gene therapy. So I just wanted to briefly ask you about your impressions and what's on the pipeline for gene therapy development. This is something that particularly struck you from this conversation.
Yeah, I thank Martin for this input. I mean, it's very exciting, and as we speak about it, I think a perception can be that it's, you know, still science fiction, but it's not. So what struck me is that what we are doing here today that really address these issues and reaching out to the wider public, I think is a great start also to move forward and to address some of the barriers we have. So I think that gaining trust and, you know, public awareness is one good thing. And obviously talking about gene therapy also from the patient story perspective, I think is important because there are so many people with different types of rare disorders that are helped today. But I mean, we are facing other types of barriers as regulations, and Martin mentioned obviously the GMO legislation. So I think here it's interesting also to see if we from a European perspective can be a bit bold when we talk about regulations, for example, because I guess it's not necessarily more regulations we need, but a framework that takes into account and builds on the needs of both innovators and patients. And for this, I mean, we need to work across borders. So that was my first takeaway.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Annika. If I could ask you also a quick follow-up question, and you could talk to us through a little bit about EIT Health. What's keeping you busy at the moment, and how are you also making sure that that Europe makes this innovation-friendly policies? Like, how are you spurring innovation across your network?
Yes, so we are, in Europe, one of the largest health innovation networks. So we collaborate cross-border. That's what we do every day. So we have within the partnership representatives from academia, from industry, pharma, but also then important are public partners, so healthcare providers, and not the least that patients and citizens are in the center. So these questions that we address here today is also very central for us, also as from a policy making perspective and thought leaderships. So for example, right now, I would say that it's very topical with the health data and the European health data space, and also to respect the patient's view in this. And also, I mean, we do innovation calls and funding for that, but most of our actions is to engage the network across Europe.
Thank you very much, Annika, for this first overview. And now to complete the panel, I think we have also with us Alexander Natz. He's the Secretary General of the European Confederation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs. Alexander, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'm not sure if we can see you. Now we can see you. Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. Alexander Natz is the Secretary General of the European Confederation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs. And I would like to ask you for some brief opening statements ahead of this discussion on innovation-friendly policies, and also especially from the perspective of SMEs, and also perhaps a little bit in reaction to what Annika just said, that perhaps we don't necessarily need more regulation, but like really put patients at the heart of this framework. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I agree very much that what we need is not more regulation, but it's more collaboration. And I think what we have seen over the last 5 years in those gene and cell therapies which have been launched in European markets is that collaboration is key. I mean, we have been seeing many what people call innovative payment models, and I think Martin has briefly talked about this, where actually payers and also the pharmaceutical and biotech company has come to a conclusion to define certain endpoints to say if that endpoint, if that outcome parameter is met for the next 5 years, only then the payer is willing to pay the full amount for those type of treatment options. And I think this is quite new, and it's a form of collaboration. It's a form of negotiation. I must say, I'm quite confident that we will see more of those promising therapies over the next 10 years if we are actually sailing in the right direction mainly from the pricing and reimbursement perspective, but also, and I agree very much with Annika, we need to make sure that patients actually get access to those type of therapies. In many of those cases, we are talking about ultra rare diseases, and there's just no expertise in some smaller EU member states, and we need to send the patients to those centers, to those hospitals where the expertise is. Martin alluded to that as well. I think there are some shortcomings, and it's for good reason that the European Commission is now looking into the cross-border healthcare directive to see actually how can we make things better. I think the cross-border healthcare legislation has worked quite well when it comes to emergency situations, like in the first wave of the COVID pandemic. We've seen hospital beds in Germany for French patients to be shared and so on. So that has worked quite well. But when it comes to rather expensive and complex cell and gene therapies, there is more to be done to really educate better so that the cross-border healthcare legislation can be actually enrolled better. I agree with Annika that the patient is at the core of all what we're doing as industry. But I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of products in the pipeline in very important disease areas. And luckily, the European Parliament has founded an initiative, an interest group called Transform, to really talk about those transformative diseases. And we're really happy that we can be involved in this discussion and that the European Parliament took this issue on.
And could you tell us, give us a couple of examples on which innovations are in the pipeline, which technologies or which innovations are we going to be talking about in the nearer future?
Right. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about the disease areas because there are so many, but clearly hemophilia A, hemophilia B, DMD, many areas in very serious diseases, but also in non-orphan diseases, we see gene and cell therapies to be developed also in many oncology indications. So what distinguishes those type of therapies, it's a one-time treatment. It's usually the patient going to the hospital for a stay for just a couple of days or even longer if it's an ex vivo gene therapy. But the duration of effect should be much longer than in a chronic treatment option. So we are also saving money in the long run to not having to pay for a chronic treatment option. We've seen those therapies developed in spinal muscular dystrophy, SMA, a very serious and deadly disease in children. And I think we've seen really promising cell and gene therapies brought to the market in certain oncology indications with the so-called CAR T cells. So technology is really advancing. I must say that from the regulatory perspective, Europe, and I think that thanks to the good legislation which we're having actually with the European Medicines Agency, Europe is really competitive to attract those therapies to the market, to bring them to the market and get access to European patients. What I think is really an issue to be debated, how can we better align with 27 different healthcare systems to have very different approaches about paying for those type of therapies? And especially many of our members are small companies, biotech companies from the US, from Europe, and they don't, actually it's quite difficult for them to bring those products to all the market at the same point in time. Now, the good thing is that the European Commission has brought up a proposal which will be soon accepted in Council about having one EU HTA system where we are starting with advanced therapy medicines, namely. There's more to be done at the reimbursement.
Thank you very much. If I can now turn to Annika once again, would you like to react to this answer? Like, talk to us a little bit. Like, where do you see the latest developments and the latest innovations in the medicine and biotechnology sector going?
Yes, if I may pick up on what Alexander also addressed when it comes to shifting in the way we do reimbursements. I think here it's very important, and I mean it's more of a paradigm shift to go from reactive care to proactive health, and also how we then can invest in prevention and other kinds of actions So this, I would say, would also be a question of education. I mean, I mentioned also the public, but here we have healthcare providers, management, and so on, so that we are all on board that this is something that we are facing, and we need to act then as a European coalition moving forward. Because, I mean, we know that there are many exciting initiatives on national level. So that's also what I would say what we do in EIT Health also is trying to pick on these good developments in certain areas of Europe and then come together. So that's what I think, struck me with Alexander's reflections.
And as a follow-up question, because I think the notion of fragmentation of this 27 different frameworks seem to be a major issue. So what else do you think is needed to foster a biotechnology innovation framework that is friendly for SMEs here in Europe? Perhaps Annika, you'd like to go first?
Yeah, pick up on the word collaboration again. So I think, I mean, it's a question also naturally that when you do innovation and have an SME-friendly environment, it's access to funding, but also to do that on a centered European level. So that's something that we do. But then I would also say that strategic innovation partnerships, so either between bilateral countries, but also across organizations. So more of a unified approach, because we also know that there are other actors around the world that are advancing maybe faster. We heard the US mentioned before and Asia. So I think that this is, key to come together and try to then center both financial efforts, but also back to the regulations to make things easier. And also, obviously, when we talk about innovation, it's a question who invests in the risks in the beginning to have this funding climate that you can advance at a very early stage. So we get more groundbreaking examples that we heard of today.
Thank you very much. Before getting back to Alexander, just also a reminder to the audience that you can send questions through the Q&A function, or if you would like to take the stage here for those who are in the floor, you can also wave at me. So in the meantime, Alexander, what is your take? What do you think else is needed to foster this SME-friendly innovation framework in Europe?
I mean, it's really important because many of those innovations stem from smaller labs. Maybe they end up in bigger companies at some point in time, but also many small and mid-sized companies have brought those products to the market. And I think what we need is to allow for some time, if I may say that in very simple words, because the expectation that all data is at the table when the EMA is bringing the product, is actually allowing the product to be released to the market, and the payers are starting to pay for it. The data will have to develop over time. This is not to say that we don't have any data at the time of launching of those medicines. I mean, there's a lot of data at the table. EMA would never authorize a medicine which has not clearly a very positive risk-benefit ratio. So there's more benefit for the patient than there is risk. But the payers are very often asking for the full data package as if it would be about a disease which we already know very well, like diabetes and some other areas. When we're talking about an ultra-rare disease, like certain leukodystrophies, which is like where we only have 100 patients in Europe or 200 patients in Europe, we don't know very much about the disease. So we need to be willing to learn and still let the product to be released to the market if the risk-benefit ratio is positive. And I think we need to, and I think Martin alluded to that, we need to work with real-world evidence data, which is gathered and analyzed once the product has been released to the market. So this is really important. And the second thing It's again a form of collaboration. I think industry has been very much offering to payers, as I said before, certain outcome guarantees to say, like, if certain parameters are not met, we're going to pay you back. And I see a willingness in some countries to really actually sign such an agreement, but other countries are very reluctant. And I think that needs to open up a little bit. So we need more form of collaboration in that respect, because actually we've seen the first failures in the market. One of our members, a company called Bluebird Bio, has actually decided to leave European markets because they didn't find a climate of reimbursement for their beta thalassemia therapy, gene therapy, which was adequate enough, even though they have offered certain outcome guarantees that if the patient would have to go back to the therapy which he got before, then there would be payback guarantees from the companies. But still, the payers were not willing to, from the company perspective, to adequately reimburse the product. So, of course, this is not always an easy thing, and there are different perspectives. I want to be very clear about this, what an adequate price is. But I think there needs to be an open-mindedness to have those negotiations and discussions, and also to allow the data generation to develop over time, and not just to say we're treating that disease like diabetes, where we already have 5 or 10 treatment options, where we're talking about a disease which we already know very well. This is different in areas like SMA and DMD and many rare cancers. So I think that's really important to allow for some time.
Annika, Alexander mentioned the idea of collaboration. Once again, is something that's been coming up quite constantly in the minutes of this discussion. So I just wondered if you wanted to add something more on that. Let's say, like, how can we increase this sense of collaboration in this ecosystem across policymakers, regulators, innovators, research and academia, educational institutions? What do you think?
Yeah, if I may use one example from Sweden, where I come, we have the healthcare provider region Stockholm that is now engaging in a project that was funded by us, and that is really to address this issue of stretched healthcare budgets. And there is really a collaboration then between innovators, healthcare providers, but also with insurance and banks, and to make sure that there is a so-called health bond to prevent, in this case, we're talking about not rare diseases, but very common diseases, the diabetes, so that the healthcare system, in collaboration with insurance companies and banks, then can have healthcare to pay when people, for the prevention rather than that they get sick. And I think this is, in a way, also groundbreaking, that there are several actors that come together to pay for prevention, and that to reduce cost in the future, because that's really tricky today when we have healthcare providers with very stretched budgets, not the least also after the pandemic. So I think really put people together at all levels, and obviously regulations is important there, but to be a bit bold in the approach, I would say.
Thank you very much, Annika. One of the concepts that has come up before in the discussions is the idea of education. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about which role education plays a role here, especially in building this innovation mindset. So how the EU can promote an innovative mindset, and what are the skills that are needed to make the innovation on medicine, on biotechnology and health a reality? What do you think that is missing here? Perhaps, I'm not sure if Alexander perhaps would like to go first.
Sure, happy to go first. This is a very important question. I mean, we're talking about so much legislation in the pharma sector, which is currently revised in Brussels. The Commission is having a look into all the basic legislation for pharmaceuticals. It's looking into the legislation for orphan drugs and so on. We have to make sure that actually innovation comes to Europe, because otherwise European patients wouldn't benefit. We can have the best agencies with EMEA. If the products are not launched in Europe for whatever reason, we have an issue. So I think it's all about patient access. And it is also relevant, and there's a very important question to be asked. Why is so many innovation, which we've seen developed in European universities, and we have some members where the innovation stems from University in Padua, but it has been developed by a person from Canada, brought to New York City, and it has been financed by Nasdaq, and now it's coming back to Europe in a way. So we have to ask ourselves the question: how can we have an innovation-friendly system so that we can keep our innovation in Europe? I mean, in my example, at least European patients have access to that innovation, even though we've seen that coming back through the US. When we're looking at those promising cell and gene therapies, a lot of this innovation, a lot of the key labs are in the US, they are not in Europe. And we have to ask ourselves the questions: how can we create a better framework that this innovation stays in Europe, which has been developed in European universities? And secondly, probably even more important, how can we make sure that actually...
I think we're losing you right now, Alexander. I think there's some connection or microphone issues, but let me just perhaps give the floor now to Annika and respond a little bit on the skill set and innovation mindset that is needed.
Yeah, very good start of Alexander there. So I just pick up, and I couldn't agree more than that this is very important to make sure that we have an innovative, attractive climate in Europe. So when we work with education, I mean, what we look into of importance, both when it comes to educating healthcare professionals, but also patients and citizens and leaders and so on, when we want to promote innovation, it is key, I would say, to be preparing for a willingness to take risks. Also to be open to new information. I mean, here we're really much talking groundbreaking therapies. Also a readiness to accept change, because many times, I mean, we have quite a lot of good ideas, innovative ideas, but it's hard to really make it happen and make it implemented in healthcare systems here today. And also, Alexander and previous speakers also have been addressing this long-term orientation. So it is something we need to sow the seeds today and pick the fruits later on. So, yeah, and back to what I also said, organizational learnings and leadership to prepare for this change.
Thank you very much, Annika. We have just a couple of minutes to go till the end of this first panel, but we have a question here at the Renaissance Hotel. Gentleman in the back, if you could briefly introduce yourself and quickly ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, citizens. My name is Angelos Harlaftis, Epafos Advisors. We represent citizens who are and scientists who are occupied with biotechnology. Generally speaking, as I'm participating to a lot of, let's say, EDGE events of the European Union the last 13 years, I'm very open to against the regulations, the too much regulatory framework of the Union. But here we have biotechnology, which we have to have a little care, because here we have to be regulated. For example, you have put in the event a question about the new mRNA technologies, which we didn't mention what does mean this. But here the most regulation is very important, because the biotechnology is full of innovation. We cannot innovate for innovation, I think. But guiding to transhumanism, with the CRISP and all these tools we have to be very careful of our human nature. That's why the regulation is very important. Right now, as I'm participating also to the European Commission's body about the bioethics, we know that in Chinese territories like Hong Kong, etc., all countries which are free of regulation, they are experimenting with chimeras. These things.
Excuse me, if I could ask you to be brief,
yes,
and if it's a question, please.
It's very important, this question, madam. So do you really think that we have to be open in about the regulation in the biotechnology field, I'm speaking, for this period of time? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Who'd like to take the question? Alexander, please go ahead.
I can, sorry for the bad connection. I can be brief. I'm not saying that we need any regulation. There needs to be a proper assessment from the ethics committees for the clinical trials which are up and running to bring a medicine to the market. These trials are assessed by the ethics committees. So I think it's really very important that we make sure that there is proper scrutiny about where are we innovating, what type of disease areas are we doing, and what type of disease areas are we conducting our clinical trials. But that's actually happening, and I don't think nobody's asking for no regulation. There's a lot of regulation around to bring a product to the market, to conduct clinical trials, and also ultimately to bring those products to the patients in terms of the reimbursement setting. So we're just saying that we probably don't need additional regulation on top of that because there are already safeguards in place. But this is not to say that there shouldn't be no regulation.
Annika, what's your take?
Well, I won't add to that, but say that as the speaker addressed, the patient perspective obviously is important. So let's make sure we involve the patients all the way the journey. So there is a dialogue, and that's important both for regulation, but ethical questions and so on. So it's good. Mm-hmm. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much to the two of you for joining us in this panel today. I mean, I think we have a lot of ideas that we're going to keep discussing, I think, throughout the afternoon/evening on everything related to data, to putting patients at the heart of the next health frameworks, different innovations, skill set, mindset. So thank you very much to the two of you for the valuable contributions.
Thank you.
And now we're moving to the next section of the day, our second Innovators Lightning Talk. We're going to be talking with different innovators in the health and biotechnology and medicine sector. So this time we have Isabell Crasto de Stefano. She's the Director for Government and Stakeholder Relations in EMEA and Spectrum Therapeutics for Canopy Growth. So if she can join us on stage, because this time she's going to be here with us in the audience.
Should I take my mask off? Or?
Yeah, I think for this talk we can. So thank you very much, Isabell, for being with us in this lightning talk. I think it will be great to hear from your experience. So if you could talk to us through a little bit on what innovative products, ideas are you working on currently? What are the main topics keeping you busy right now?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Spectrum Therapeutics during this European Liberal Forum Science Not Fiction event. I think also that science not fiction is the best heading actually to introduce this topic. Spectrum Therapeutics incorporates actually canopy growth, human and animal research development, and of course all healthcare professional education programs. So basically our European headquarters is in Frankfurt, and we do supply European countries with GMP certified medicinal cannabinoid products. These are monocompound or full spectrum products. And when it comes to innovation, actually innovation in our sector is coming to satisfy the unmet needs of our patients. So it is a very young sector. It is developing, and we're seeking actually to adjust our products. Lately we launched oils and gel capsules on the European market, and we are also the only company that includes in its portfolio an EU certified medicinal device for the intake of medicinal cannabinoids. So as mentioned, it's a very young sector. It is developing since almost 5 years in Europe. And as well, what business are trying to do in supporting innovation and development in that field is to collect data, to collect insights, to collect analytics, actually to understand every day better our patients and to bring this sector forward.
And how do you see something that we've talked about is like how the let's say the policy framework, the regulatory framework looks like for different companies and different innovators. So how would you describe it? How do you navigate as European policy framework?
So I actually would say that there is no European regulatory framework for medicinal cannabinoids currently. So that means for us that we need to develop our business in regulatory fragmented landscape. So basically, not every country in Europe has an access scheme for medicinal cannabinoids. That means for us as a business that we need to fulfill different requirements according to the country we are supplying medicinal cannabinoids in terms of import, export, supply, production, transformation of our products, but also in terms of product specifications. And that regulatory fragmentation is not just hindering business development, but it's detrimental also for other players of this ecosystem. First of all, the patients, because patients all over Europe have no equal access to medicinal cannabinoids. So in some countries, they have no access. In others, to give you a practical example, they might have only access to prescriptions by general doctors, in others by specialist doctors. And how is it then with the recognition, the cross-border recognition of that prescription? And if we have different specifications for our products in every country, is it possible that the patient gets the same product in country A and country B? So you see there are effects for patients. It's the same for doctors. In some countries, doctors cannot explore the beneficial effects of medicinal cannabinoids because they cannot prescribe because there is no access scheme in place. It's affecting research because universities need to have permits to research on narcotics, and it is affecting also clinical research and education, of course.
But you see perhaps that there's been an increasing acceptance and increasing access in across member states from cannabinoids and.
So currently we have a very interesting, I would say also effective and efficient model for access to medicinal cannabinoids, and this is the German model. It progressed over the years, and it gives some very interesting examples also of collection of real-world evidence. What I saw is actually that this topic has been a very hot topic before COVID, and also that European institutions were moving in the right direction. Of course, this has a bit delayed. So I think what would be already beneficial for this sector would be if the pertinent committee would finalize the EU pharmacopoeia entrances for cannabis and cannabinoids, would start seeking common understanding of quality and safety requirements for these products. This would in turn benefit patients in terms of equal access to equal products, would benefit doctors, and would of course benefit scientific communities. I understand also that it is a very controversial topic, and it is difficult to find common consensus at international level. We experience this for our topic in Europe, but also at UN level, for instance, where drug policies and health policies are decided. But however, I never stress too much that actually Europe is the best expression of finding common consensus, and this is on the grounds of minimum common standards. So I truly welcome and truly call the European Commission to set those standards also for medicinal cannabinoids. First of all, to increase quality of life of our patients and the patients that would like to have access to medicinal cannabinoids.
Interesting. When we see the barriers, perhaps, that are preventing certain companies and certain sectors flourish, I mean, I think we've already been seeing several examples of fragmentations of regulations across Europe, etc. So I was just wondering, which other challenges, like which other key issues do you think that you as an innovator are facing?
Well, there is, first of all, a lack of scientific research and clinical research on the compounds of the cannabis plant. This is related also to the legal fragmentation. So I think that you all are aware about the cannabidiol hype that is crossing all over Europe. So CBD, better known as CBD, all companies acting in that area and making business are still acting in a very gray area because there is no European understanding about cannabidiol so far. And there is no regulatory framework based on the final usage of that compound. So we really need, and I want to differentiate scientific research and clinical research, we need to have a better understanding and knowledge about the compounds of the cannabis plant, about their beneficial effects, about how we can invest those cannabinoids in medicinal treatment. And then we need, of course, clinical research. And while we're developing the clinical randomized trials, we need to collect data. So we need to have real-world evidence because we know that RWE and RTCs are actually supplementary and complementary. And I cannot stress enough what Germany did, for instance. So Germany, with the statutory health insurances, launched a 5-year program for the collection of data on patients that were using medicinal cannabinoids, that are using medicinal cannabinoids. And this delivered a great tool, first of all, for public health management in terms of cost-effectiveness assessment, and then, of course, a tool to assess the beneficial effects of medicinal cannabis, but as well the side effects. So it was also a pharmacovigilance tool. It is still a pharmacovigilance tool.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, that only and that especially benefits the patient, right? Because for me, for instance, I would want to have all the information at my disposal on the benefits, on the side effects, etc. If I make a final decision whether I want to using this new pharmacs or not, right?
Absolutely, and I would like to stress also that medicinal cannabinoids, the therapy needs to be accompanied by the doctor. So there needs to be doctor supervision about the treatment, about the intake of medicinal cannabinoids. So the patient needs to be followed by the doctor. So it's a bilateral relation, how the patient wants to know what kind of product he is intaking. Also, the doctor needs to be educated about the treatment. So it's really important also to invest in professional healthcare education. And yes, to develop a common understanding and a common European language about that topic. And it's a very innovative sector, not only in the field of actually the more traditional pharma as we understand that today, but it's innovative also in terms of agriculture, so in terms of production. We use high technology to produce actually medicinal cannabinoids. It is a sector that involves and engage universities, research centers, students, but also highly qualified professionals. So it needs to be supported, and I truly hope that we might at a certain point have a European understanding and a European language to speak about that topic.
Isabell, we received a question from Zoom, from Vlad Popescu. He's asking, how can we bring these products to certain EU member states, for instance, Bulgaria or Latvia, if the European Commission does not approve them?
Well, it depends on the national member state and the national narcotic law. So that means that each member state can recognize the values of medicinal cannabinoids. What I would like also to stress that there has been during the last year an international recognition about these beneficial effects, because the World Health Organization launched its recommendations that have been voted by the Commission on Narcotic Drug drugs, and it's actually recognized at international level that cannabinoids, especially THC and CBD, can be used to treat debilitating diseases. So every member state that has signed the conventions for the control of narcotic substances can decide to create access schemes, national access schemes. However, as mentioned, if we would have a European approach that is based on best practices, on success stories that have been shared by other member states that already experienced and already put in place access schemes, the European Union could develop guidelines that would be actually really a guide for those member states that are interested in launching those access schemes.
Thank you very much. So if I could ask you one last wrap-up question before we move to the next session. So what else do you think that Europe should be doing in nurturing and retaining innovative talent, be it business and SMEs or individuals, to stay at the forefront of this medicinal, of this technological process?
Well, it's I would say, challenging question, but as mentioned, I believe that it's very hard to find a common consensus when there's so many players at the same table. However, communication is key, and partnership is key. So partnership between the European Union, the European institutions, and the national member states in the sector, in the field of health, supporting research, innovation, and business development, and of course also retaining talent and supporting talent is key to this sector and the development of this sector in Europe.
Interesting. Again, like two concepts that have already been coming up. So on the one hand, the importance of collaborations, the importance of partnerships in addressing these common challenges, but also the retaining the talent, the skill set of our innovation workforce. So thank you very much, Isabell, for being with us, for introducing us to the topic of cannabinoids, to the work of Spectrum Therapeutics and Canopy growth. I mean, I'm sure that this is something that we're going to be hearing much, much more about in the next year. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we're moving to our very last, but not least, panel of today. The question that we're going to be trying to address is whether are we as Europe ready for the next health revolution. So I'm very happy to be welcoming our next two guests today. So on the one hand, we have Maya Matthews. She's a head of unit for performance of national health systems at the DG for Health and Food Safety, so DG Santé at the European Commission. And we also have Remko van Leeuwen with us. He's the founder and CEO of Madam Therapeutics and a board member of the BEAM Alliance. So thank you very much to the two of you for being with us.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Great to have you. So if I can quickly first address Maya for a second and ask you for a bit of a follow-up question on what we have just heard from Spectrum Therapeutics and the developments of Canopy-related pharmaceutic innovation. So what could you tell us about it? I think we cannot hear you.
Yeah. Now can you hear me?
There you are. Thanks,
yes,
Maya.
Okay. No, I wanted to congratulate Isabell. I found it a fascinating talk, and I think she explained very clearly the difficulties with introducing new innovative products. I have checked. I mean, as you'll hear afterwards from my speech, this is not my area of expertise, but I do know that the cannabis-derived medicinal products do fall under the existing definition of a medicinal product laid down under the EU legislation. So you can apply for EU authorization for medicinal products derived from cannabis. And I think there is one authorized product already. I think it was very clear that the innovation, the research is still needed. I think it's also, as Isabell said, it comes at an interface of many different sensitivities. So I do think that there is a great potential and great hope, but as is often the case, the regulation is a few steps behind. Having said that, as you know, there is the new pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which really aims to increase access, increase innovation, especially for unmet needs. So this fits very well in that category. And there is an open consultation at the moment, open to the public. So I would invite people to send in your comments about how we can make the review of the pharmaceutical legislation more future-proof, more adapted to technological innovations and innovative products. And this public consultation is open until the 21st of December. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Remko. So, as a kind of Kickstarter for our conversation, could you tell us a little bit about Madame Therapeutics, what it is about, and what's the main innovations on the pipeline for you?
Well, I founded Madame Therapeutics 10 years ago, and I have a medical background, so I worked in infectious diseases, and I saw firsthand the need for having novel antimicrobials to treat patients. And in fact, if you look at the current pandemic that we're facing, we're actually facing an infectious disease that, turn out the newspaper and you see that it's very difficult to control. I think some people are already looking ahead about, what is next? How can we prepare ourselves for the next pandemic? And the question that I then pose is, what pandemic? It's very difficult to predict what the next pandemic will be. I think a lot of the activities that I've seen, for example, with my own government and how they think about preparing for the next pandemic, is that people tend to think, we have seen several viral diseases. We had SARS-1, we had MERS, now SARS-2. So let's prepare for an acute viral disease as the next pandemic. But the risk here is that we might prepare for the wrong pandemic. And I think it's very predictable that resistant bacteria can be a next pandemic. It's different from the pandemic that we see now, which has an acute moment, which happened very fast. But we see year by year the incidence of resistant bacteria growing and growing. So it's very predictable that that will be an issue in the future. It is already an issue at the southern and eastern borders of Europe. So we need to prepare for a bacterial pandemic. And I think it's very important to be ready also with new antibiotics. And in fact, antibiotics with a novel mechanism of action hasn't reached the market in the last 4 decades. So that was my motivation to start Madame Therapeutics.
Interesting. For those of us who are not that into the health sector, and perhaps many of these things that come across as new, like how does this bacterial resistance develop?
That's
in very kind of like layman terms.
It's a very good question. And we heard today a lot about new technologies, for example, gene therapy. And whereas gene therapy offers a lot of potential for people who are suffering from cancer, for example, the risk is that despite the novel ways that we have available to cure people from cancer, they may still contract a very normal bacterial disease, which currently, fortunately, is in most cases still treatable. But if we continue to not develop new antibiotics, the risk that we run is that at a certain point in time we have no working antibiotics left.
Very interesting, and I think that already sets the scene for what we're going to be discussing in the next up to a half an hour. So you know the drill. You can ask questions both here in the floor for those who are present in the room, but also on Zoom through the Q&A function. So now, if I can turn again back to Maya, the question of this panel is whether we are ready for the next health revolution. So I'd like to ask you straight away. So are we ready for this revolution, and how this revolution does really look like?
Yeah, so actually I was going to kick off about the revolution that we need in healthcare delivery, but I think that the Remko speech about AMR, it's something I'm actually very passionate about. And the European Union has also prioritized AMR because I completely agree that now all attention is on this infectious disease that we're dealing with the pandemic of COVID. But antimicrobial resistance is something that has been looming filming for quite a few months. And I would like to ask the audience, who virtual and in the room, I mean, how many of you have taken an antibiotic and it hasn't worked? And I've done this 5 years ago, and I was in a room with 90 people, and I think about 10 people raised their hand 5 years ago. So I'm curious to know, because the antibiotic resistance, it's here already. It's not something that's in the future. We are dealing with it already. And from the European Union, we look at it from a One Health approach. We look at it from the animal side, because veterinary medicines are very heavily used in antibiotics, and from the human side. And I completely agree that we need to look at the pipeline. We need to look at new antibiotics. We also need to look at alternatives to antibiotics, and crucially, quick diagnostics, because this then also reduces the amount of antibiotics that are used if you can quickly know whether you have a bacterial infection or not. So I just wanted to add that I completely agree that this is something that we have to work on. We are working on it. The new pharmaceutical strategy for Europe is very much prioritizing looking at incentives to increase new antibiotics, but also we have to look at the prudent use across the board. And this is where the health systems revolution comes in. We have to make sure that antibiotics are only prescribed when they are needed. And that's something that's very difficult to do, because it's linked, it's a multifactorial issue. It's linked with your behavior and the behavior of doctors. So it's a very complicated thing, but I did want to reassure the speakers that absolutely tackling antimicrobial resistance is definitely needed for the healthcare revolution. If I can just mention 2 points, I don't want to take up too much time, but I wanted to focus my talk on innovation, but on healthcare delivery innovation. So I know you've heard today about all the very innovative products and new medicines and new therapies, but I want to talk about how our health systems are organized, and how we can maybe learn a little bit from what we've dealt with in the pandemic now on digital. So we've seen how the delivery of healthcare through digital means has accelerated. It's accelerated not because there was some great political will. It's accelerated because out of necessity, because we had to cut face-to-face communications with healthcare professionals. And so all of these solutions that we had in the pipeline, or we had as pilots, became then de rigueur the norm. And now we're at a situation where I think it's very important that we need to evaluate these. We need to harness the positive aspects. So we need to really make sure that what worked can continue, but there might also be, the whole digital divide. People are talking about, well, okay, you have to have a smartphone to reach things, or you have to be able to have a computer linked. So it's very important now that we're living through a transformative time, and it's always very difficult during these transformation periods to try to capture the positive innovations and to try to roll them out quickly. And then the second point I wanted to raise was the importance of public health. So public health, we've seen, and here I'm talking about surveillance, I'm talking about the track and tracing, I'm talking about vaccination rollout. I think the pandemic has shown us how desperately under-resourced and undervalued public health has been during the last decade. So we've seen in Europe, it's been a huge wake-up call that we didn't have track and trace on our fingertips, that many countries were like at the same time having to vaccinate their whole population, but didn't actually have a system in place. So for me, for the healthcare revolution, we also need to have a public health revolution where we're talking about the skills and the talents that are needed. Never before have we all looked and relied on epidemiologists. So for me as well, it's the healthcare revolution is about public health. It's about rolling out healthcare delivery through digital means. And it's also about looking at the health workforce that we have and how we can try to adapt the skills of the health workforce and making it a more prestigious and attractive profession to be in.
Thank you very much, Maya. Remko, would you like to react?
Yeah, I think that I very much agree with everything that Maya just mentioned. And, I think listening in on the conversations also in the earlier sessions, I think there's no shortage on technologies, right? So we have a lot of potential to change perspectives for patients. But if you look at actual implementation of policies, I think a lot of what we do is actually short-term thinking. Bringing this back to the current pandemic, I think that we all are disappointed by the steep rise in the number of cases here in Northern Europe, especially despite the high vaccination rates. Yet we see that our governments are very much focusing on short-term measures. And I think, it's really time to think about not what we need to do in the next month or so to get curve flat, but really, what do you need to do in the next couple of months and the next couple of years. One of the things that I had prepared for this session was actually, and I think it's related to what I heard about pricing and reimbursement for the gene therapy solutions, where I think the main issue is the high end of the pricing that people are not willing to pay. But I think for antibiotics, it's precisely the opposite. We have a market failure because there's actually no real market for companies to recap their investments. And the reason for that is very straightforward. If you develop a new antibiotic with a new mechanism of action, you really want to put that on the shelf and use it as little as possible to prevent the occurrence of resistance. And it makes a lot of sense from a public health perspective, but it's not such a good case from a business perspective. So I think it's tremendously important that we recognize that we need to do something not only at the level of regulation, as we've heard today, not only at the level of patient involvement, but also at the level of reimbursement, and thinking about creative ways to do something about this reimbursement issue. We've heard that for gene therapy, by, for example, only paying if there's a long-term effect. Our plea would be to do that also for antibiotics, but then, for example, think about Netflix type of models where you reimburse not by the sales of a particular antibiotic, but more the right to use an antibiotic. And there are more variations on that system. And my call on the European Commission is take leadership and make sure that, this is going to be implemented throughout Europe. And not something that is going to be thrown back to the 27 member states, but then we know it's going to take a long time.
Interesting. Maya, what do you think of it?
Yeah, no, I think this whole idea, I think it's very good that you raise this issue. I mean, of course, I can say that, as you know, the reimbursement of medicines, the pricing, this is a member state competence. But for many years now, we've been looking at kind of innovative funding solutions, public-private partnerships. I heard you saying that the term partnerships has been used a lot. I completely agree that we need to do this. No one country, no one organization can address these kind of global challenges. And for me, AMR is definitely a global challenge. It won't even work if we just do this in Europe. This has to be kind of a global issue. And many countries like Germany put AMR on the global agenda of G7 and G20. So I think that there is definitely a recognition of AMR being a global challenge, and there's a lot happening. But here I do agree that it's such a difficult issue because of the market failure issue that was raised. But we are within the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe. We are definitely aware of these issues, and we're looking at kind of different types of incentive schemes. I mean, the reality is that we all need to work towards the same goal, and the problem is that the goal is obviously to reduce antimicrobial resistance, but we don't have the tools at the moment to do that because of the market failure. So I think it's very challenging, but it also there are lots of innovative ideas out there, and it's just a matter of being able to actually implement them.
Mm-hmm. Also, now when we talk about the long term, my next question, in fact, in my script was whether we are ready to respond to the next pandemic. I'm going to rephrase it differently because in the case of the Commission, I wanted to ask what's in the pipeline in terms of emergency responses. So, I mean, I know that there's been a lot of work behind the preparation for a European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority. So, Maya, could you talk to us through a little bit about the Commission's plans from this point of view?
Sure. I hope everyone can have a cup of tea because I can talk for about an hour about what's been going on. So As you know, our president, very early on in the pandemic, basically said that it was time. Now we saw that when the pandemic hit, the EU did not have the tools that we needed to respond quickly. We could send vaccines for animal diseases immediately with vets to countries, but we didn't actually in the EU have the tools to be able to do the same for human diseases and human reactions. And this was a big shock. It was a big shock to citizens across Europe. When countries were calling out for help, we couldn't actually do it. We don't have the legislative means available. So we had to create ad hoc mechanisms. We created kind of money budget lines, and as a result, the president called for the need to make a European Health Union. And the European Health Union is, on the one hand, a response to the current pandemic, but it is also looking long term at health in general, so that we're not in this position again, that we can work with partners, we can work with member states, with global partners, with industry, with civil society. We all need to work on this together. And so for the short term kind of response to the pandemic, we have a new legislation which is currently being negotiated on how we can respond better to health threats, and we are proposing to also adapt the mandate of the European Centre for Disease Control and the European Medicines Agency. And we've created, as you mentioned, a new service which will be within the European Commission to look at really how to prepare specifically for kind of infectious disease crises. But here also AMR is a priority. So looking again at innovative ideas of procurement, stockpiling, so that we can really react much quicker when the next pandemic hits. But this European Health Union is not only about the short term and about reacting to crises. It's also looking at where we can draw together all the expertise, the resources, the pooling of knowledge, best practices for areas around, for example, cancer. So we've adopted a Beating Cancer plan, and this is the first time we really want to try to galvanize and to really have one place where all of the information and resources and expertise on how to deal with cancer can come under one umbrella. So that's the Beating Cancer plan. And then finally, we have the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which I mentioned previously. And coming up, we will have the European Health Data Space. And I'm sure that in the speakers today and from previous meetings have highlighted the absolute importance of data. I mean, I think in this pandemic, we've seen how crucial real-time data has been, and the need not only for patients to be aware of their own medical records, but also the importance of having secondary data for research purposes and for policy making. Absolutely. You've touched upon two of the key concepts that have been coming out today. So on the one hand, the need for anticipation, the need for foresight in addressing the long-term strategies, and then also, of course, the need for data and all the implications behind the use of this data, right? So, Remko, would you like to react?
Yeah, I have a suggestion and a question for Maya. So let me start with the suggestion. When Ursula von der Leyen first addressed HERA, and I think it was in September 2020, so only a year ago, she made the comparison with the US version, which is called BARDA. BARDA exists for already 10 years, and BARDA has been tremendously instrumental in supporting R&D as well. So the plea would be make sure HERA is not only about stockpiling and about innovative procurement, but also about R&D. I think that would really be helpful. The question that I have for Maya is that, if you look at the way that the Commission has taken leadership in procuring COVID vaccines, I think despite the fact that there might be some initial hiccups, it can be considered quite a success in the sense that, vaccines have been distributed equally over Europe. I think as European citizens, we have the privilege that we all had the opportunity, most of us had the opportunity to be vaccinated. Do you think that a similar approach would be possible, similar leadership from the Commission would be possible for other infectious diseases? In other words, are member states willing to transfer some of their mandate on health with regards to infectious diseases to the Commission to make the process more efficient?
Thanks a lot. So first of all, just to reassure you that R&D is definitely part of the mandate of HERA. So as you said, it is modeled on the BARDA. I think what gives it actually more added value, more chances is that also it's again a partnership approach. So we'll be working very closely with member states, with their own organizations that they have. So we're really trying to like bring everything together so that in Europe we really have a very strong organization that will really be able to both provide foresight and horizon scanning, whilst at the same time preparing well for the next pandemic. And R&D is definitely in there, and for AMR as well, by the way. For your second question about whether member states would be willing, I think you'd have to ask member states that. I don't think I'm the one to ask that. I think that, as you said, we have to learn from the experience, and we'll have to see if member states, believe that this could be a way to go.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you think that we can keep this balance in terms of the future legislation and the policy frameworks that we're moving ourselves into, between allowing space for innovation in this area, especially for SMEs, whilst also being prepared for all the ethical and privacy concerns that might arise? Would you like to go first, Remko?
Yeah, I think some of the previous speakers already alluded to, the right balance in the regulatory system. I think that's tremendously important, but it's probably not the only answer. And for me, it's really about creating a healthy ecosystem. SMEs, I think also in the area of antimicrobial drugs are very important. The BEMA lines that I represent have over 70 members. They all have very innovative programs to bring these products to patients, but that only works if the ecosystem is healthy and well. So that is something I think that is very important to work on.
How about you, Maya? What do you think? How can we continue building these healthy ecosystems?
No, I want to pick up on that, because I think that there is also the importance of the skills and identifying the skills gap. And in the health ecosystem, we have to look at the skills gap because there is this need to address what's happening in terms of technology. How many people do we have who can actually work in some of the cutting edge skills and technologies that are needed? How can we entice the talent to be in Europe, to stay in Europe, and these are issues that are very much at the forefront of the thinking in the EU. I also think that the same can be said for actual health workers. So it's about looking at the health ecosystem as a whole. So the people working in the health industry, but also the people delivering healthcare. And I think here we need to also very much think about that, because as I said, I wanted to talk about the healthcare delivery revolution, that are the skills that are being taught in school, in medical schools, in nursing schools, are those the skills that actually the future nurses and doctors need? Should there be more about communication? Now, if we are going to move more digitally to teleconsultations, or especially to devices where the patients are doing a lot of the monitoring themselves, what are the kind of skills that the future nurses and doctors will actually need to be able to implement all of the new technologies that are coming on board?
Remko, what do you think? Do we have the skill set needed for the health revolution of coming up in the next years?
Yeah, I think, yes and no. Yes, I think that, there is, I think if you compare Europe to other continents, there's a very good education system. So I think, we do have, I think, a very healthy ecosystem regarding that. At the same time, a health revolution means change, and change means another attitude towards how to deal with all these changes. It's tremendously important, I think, that we take the patient perspective, citizens' perspective into perspective here. I started my career actually in HIV research, and I think what's interesting about HIV is that although we do not have a working vaccine as we do for COVID, we do have a very effective way in helping people to prevent infection in the form of pharmaceuticals called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. But you actually see that the rollout of PrEP is actually doing quite well in certain risk groups in this part of the world, but overall on the world's population, it is not. And, if we here talk, for example, about new technologies in gene therapy, CRISPR-Cas and everything, I think there's a tremendous amount of work that we need to do to explain to citizens the importance and why they would benefit from it. So taking the consumer, the patients, the citizens' perspective, I think is key. And, you cannot do enough education to make sure that our healthcare workers keep that in mind.
Thank you very much, Remko. Now, we're running out of time. I mean, I think, we have under 5 minutes left for our discussion. So if I can ask you kind of a wrap-up question now, what else do you think the EU needs to do to ensure that current and future innovations are promoted, are encouraged within Europe in terms of market access, in terms of retaining talent? What will be on your wish list, Remko?
Well, if I may start, and Mike can add, I already talked about the market challenges. So, centralization at the European level, I think, is critical. Another thing that I think is very important is that Europe is 27 member states. If we can synchronize the legislation a bit, that would also help. And I think it's very important that the member states commit to their the general rule that 3% of the GDP should be spent on R&D. If I look at my own country, it's not the case. If we do that, both at the central level of the Commission, but also at the level of the member states, I think that would be really helpful.
Excellent. Maya, how about you? Some final thoughts?
For me, I mean, I've worked in public health for 20 years. And so for me, these past 2 years have been very tough, but also it's shown, I think, to everyone that health is something that is, affects everyone. And when you have a pandemic like this, it's also a time to really innovate. And so I think that for me, the message would be that we've already done quite a lot in a very short space of time, and we need to continue with that. We need to use the momentum now. We need to make sure that health remains kind of a priority and that it doesn't then just go back to business as usual. So for me, it's about sustaining the momentum and really making change that will help all patients, around the world to get the care and that they need.
Thank you very much, Maya, and also to Remko for having joined us this afternoon/evening for this session under Science Not Fiction. I mean, I think something that is very clear based on our discussions is that the new health revolution will be about public health, will anticipate to the long-term challenges of the future and the potential future pandemics. It will be collaborative, it will bring all actors together, and it will also foster the talent, the innovators of the future that we need to make all of these plans and strategies happen. So thank you very much, the two of you, for having joined us today in this Science Not Fiction event. And now, well, I mean, we're nearing the end of our discussion today. So, I mean, I think it's great to see all of you joining us either in person or online. I'm sure you will all have joined a lot the event and gotten back with really new ideas and perhaps also some inspiration. So if I could just invite right now for some final remarks, for some final words, Lauren Mason, a project coordinator at the European Liberal Forum. Thank you very much, Lauren, for being with us.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today, whether here present in Brussels or online. Now, I wanted to take just a moment to situate a bit this conference within the greater context of the project called Science Not Fiction that ELF is running. Interestingly, I did receive the question in the lobby about why a liberal think tank might run a conference on biotechnology. And one of the things that I'd like to start pointing out is the sign here at my feet, which says "Own the Future." And one of the things that we're looking at with this project precisely feeds into the innovation policy of the EU. And I think one thing that we'd like to stress as a liberal think tank is how we can own the future. That is, to be aware of what's coming, but not to fear it, not to be afraid of it. This actually is the third conference in the series Science Not Fiction. In the first conference, we looked at digital policy, so looking at software innovation. In the second conference, we looked at hardware, so innovations relating to the industry, more broadly speaking. And in this third installation, then we focused on biotechnology and medicine. And the next steps for us will be putting this all together into a report, looking at, many of the things that we heard actually in today's conference relating to how Europe can be at the forefront of innovation. We have the great universities, we have the great ideas, but how can we keep that talent in Europe? How can we make sure that Europe has the correct regulation in place, has the good visionary approach and leadership in place to actually make that a reality? And I think one of the things that we've definitely noticed from today and hearing all of the experts is that what perhaps European citizens and some European policymakers felt was science fiction is actually much closer to science reality. And these things are really just on our doorstep, if not already here. So these are some thoughts to be taking away for the end of the conference. A big thank you again to Anna for moderating us today, and to all of you for joining. There are a few drinks and nibbles outside for those of you who are here in Brussels and want to discuss the topics further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and also to extension to the European Liberal Forum for having hosted us today. I think this is only the start of the conversation. We will keep all the talk, all the debates that have been going on today, and we'll have many opportunities to advance on them together. Speaking about the future, we have a couple of small announcements, because those of you who are in the room, you will find the Liberal White Book. It's a small booklet that the European Liberal Forum has prepared, as far as I understand, on preparation and as part of their demands for the conference on the future of Europe. So feel free to take a look to see, what are the liberal ideas on the way to 2030. Then I've also heard that next year we'll probably have some more science not fiction events coming up, right? Second edition running.
Indeed, yeah. Next year, so keep it on your radar.
Excellent. So make sure to keep an eye on the next events coming up. So the second edition of Science Not Fiction running from next year, from 2022, and also the upcoming events that the European Liberal Forum will be running. So just some very last words of thank you once again for the sponsors who have also made this event possible today. So Qualcomm and Apple, thank you very much for your support in running today's event, and also the series of Science Not Fiction. And to all of you, thank you very much for participating, for sticking with us this afternoon, and see you very soon at our next events.
Can you imagine a world where biosensors monitor patients at risk? Drugs and pills are bioprinted. Tailor-made organs are grown from patients' body cells. Hereditary diseases can be treated more effectively. Human genome sequencing will teach us more about our health. Gene editing will be a viable treatment. All this is right on our doorstep. These developments show us that we have the intellectual capabilities to surpass many health and environment-related hurdles. We just need to support our innovators to turn fiction into reality. The rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines and their innovative spillover into new mRNA methods is one example of how tangible these dreams are becoming. How can the EU help this sector flourish in Europe? How can we make sure that the next breakthrough will take place in one or several of the EU's member states? Join us on November 18 to find out.